Hi, I'm Jamie. This is Dead Dodge Garage, and this is my friend Vivian's 1963 Dodge Dart GT. I don't know if you've heard this, but I'm actually quite fond of classic Mopars in white. Even my not white classic Mopars tend to involve some white. And as a matter of fact, white early A-bodies tend to be among my favorites. So for that reason, among others, I'm particularly fond of this Dart. 1963 was a pivotal year for the A-body as these cars moved away from the road-toed design towards something a little bit more sleek and less weird. Something I've discussed in previous videos but people don't seem to grasp or agree with is the fact that the 1963 A-bodies were penned by Virgil Exner. These were the last new designs with his name on them to be released. If you look closely, there are some obvious through lines that connect these back to the road-toed cars. This body line right here on the quarter panel is an obvious one. There are so many other design points that are clearly forward-look era Exner though. The waterfall inverted grille thing is one, the tunneled headlights on the fenders, the curvature of the hood, and many other small things. Elwood Engel, of course, had taken over as chief stylist at Chrysler in 1961, and he did tweak the 1963 designs a little bit. One important thing he did was take away Exner's round rear fender opening on the Valiant quarter panel in favor of the flat line, which totally ruins the look of these Barracudas. You'll see I've fixed that here with a hacksaw. Now, these early era A-bodies have never gotten the love or appreciation that the 67 and up cars do, and there are very good reasons for that. Obviously, those later cars have more of a muscle car look, and V8s fit in them easily. But I like these early A-bodies, and in particular, I like the 63s. I think the grills on both the 63 Dart and the Valiant, though kind of awkward, are the best ones. Now, there are a couple small issues with trying to complete your wildest automotive dreams using one of these early A-bodies. A big one, the size of the engine compartment. See, these cars were designed specifically to be powered by a Slant 6, either a 170 short deck engine like this, or the slightly taller, but not much wider 225. All of that would start to change in 1964 with the release of the 273 LA engine, which was designed specifically to fit into these cars. If you know me, you know I'm a giant fan of the 273, which is why I built this ridiculous thing. To accommodate the V8 engine, the steering linkage was changed to make room for the oil pan, and the firewall was redesigned to be flat. You can fit an LA V8 in a 63 A-body, but to do that, you need to beat this piece of the firewall with a hammer, or cut it out. Or both, apparently. But that's not at all what Vivian wants for this car. See, she uses this thing for regular daily transportation and for highway road trips. The excellent fuel economy of the Slant 6 plays a big part in this car being good for that. There are actually a lot of things about this car that make it interesting and fun. Here's one of them now. That is a sway bar, something you do not often see on an early A-body. Next to it at the ends here, disc brakes. You might have already noticed the later hubcaps sourced from a Plymouth Duster or something. These, of course, are the UFO style, and they are hiding the large bolt pattern this car has already been converted to. Note the car does still have the factory 7 1/4 axle. It's in a fresh coat of black paint because it's been rebuilt. By me, as a matter of fact. You might already know this, but I actually used to have an actual proper automotive repair business, and I did a bunch of work on this car at that business. One of the other things I did was remove the transmission to send it off to have a rebuild, which turned out to be a complete debacle. I don't want to talk about that. I also don't want to talk about the fact that that transmission is leaking everywhere, among other things. Really thankful for the existence of these drip trays about now. I didn't install the disc brake kit, but I did delete the pump and pray in favor of this dual pop master cylinder, and in typical Jamie and Colin fashion, I installed an adjustable proportioning valve down there on the frame rail. That appears to be a rebuilt steering box. Maybe it's a firm feel. If I did that, I don't remember. I know I put new engine mounts on it because we were trying to solve a vibration issue. You'll notice this car is rocking a Junkyard Fresh Super 6 air cleaner. Under that is a shiny new BBD, or it was a couple years ago. It's leaking everywhere, just normal BBD things. No battery hold down. That is a big no-no. It's on my list. In case you've ever wondered why I insist on putting those on everything, well, I have my reasons. We do have electronic ignition hiding over here. Very nice. Things are pretty well sorted in here. This car really is a driver. I don't know how many thousands of miles she's put on it in the last 24 years or so, but I think it's a lot. For that reason, stuff is kind of grimy and greasy and leaky. If you watch the channel frequently and you're watching this video when it came out, then you know it's Engine Wednesday, so you probably have half an idea where we're going here. A few months back now, I did my first installment on this, This is a lightweight 225 engine out of a 1983 Dodge truck. At the time, I explained that this was going to be a performance-oriented 225 build. Nothing crazy, but, you know, solid street performance. It's been like a year since a local junkyard plucked this thing out of a truck that I actually used to own, and I did a teardown video on it way back then, showing that it was in remarkably good shape when we started. As I explained in the last video, I couldn't get much farther with the build until I had the donor engine out of the car to finish putting it together. Well, here it is. Of course, if you watch my videos, you know it's been here for a while. I got distracted. I don't want to talk about it. This engine was overhauled in, I think, the early 2000s. The head was gone through at that time, and a reground cam from Delta was installed. Other than that, it's mostly stock parts. If you want to build a Slant 6, you're pretty much stuck with mostly stock parts, but I digress. If you want all the details on this, I highly recommend you go back and watch the video I did when I was assembling it to this point. The broad strokes version is, this is a factory 80s block, which was lighter weight than the earlier ones. It's been shaved 50 thousandths, something like that. This is a factory type replacement piston in a 30 thousandths overbore size. The crankshafts in these later engines are special as well. These are cast instead of forged. They use a smaller main bearing surface. They are significantly lighter than the earlier ones they replaced. We're using stock connecting rods. Nothing special was done here except for a basic resizing, and these parts were balanced, of course. You could put the early style head right on the later style block, so we're going to be doing that. This thing will probably be gone through. It'll need new seals, I'm sure, and it may well get decked as well to get the compression up to something reasonable. We're going to use the cam and lifters out of this engine directly, keeping the lifters in order, as long as they look okay. We're going to be using all the engine dress parts, the Super 6 setup, this exhaust manifold, which I think is in nice shape, and everything else around this Slant 6. You may be asking yourself, Jamie, how much horsepower do you expect to make out of this 225 Slant 6 engine? I literally have no idea. More, I think. I suppose at some point I should explain why I'm actually doing this. See, this Slant 6, though it's been rebuilt, is well worn, let's say. I've been through several different rounds of trying to tune this thing, getting it to run properly. The timing requirements it has displayed have been odd, and it's just never quite been right. Finally, in this very spot, like a year and a half or 2 years ago, I did a compression check. Now, a compression check, of course, is a great way to gauge your engine's health. It's also something I almost never do, and I have my reasons for that. Mostly, it's obnoxious. But I did it here, and it revealed we have at least one very weak cylinder. Again, in this very spot, I installed these new engine mounts hoping to fix an obvious vibration issue. I think I actually shimmed this one up, judging by the way it's sitting, to try and level the engine, which didn't help at all. Oh, I shimmed both of them. Why did I do that? Anyway, between the vibration, the weak cylinder, or maybe it was two, I don't even remember anymore, and the leaks from everywhere, this engine just really needed to come out and get a freshening. And if we were going to do all that, well, it made sense to get the best version of the 225 we could. I don't think I can stress enough here how much of a horrible mess this thing is. You know, I was going to leave the transmission in place, but I think I need to just pull it out and replace every single seal on it. Again. Obviously, I'm going to start by draining all of the fluids. I will actually pop a block drain out of the Slant 6. There's only one, unlike the V8s, and it's easy to get to, so that's nice for preventing future horrible messes. I'll drain the oil. I probably will go ahead and drain the transmission. You know, all the fluid that it hasn't drained itself anyway. And then we'll get to removing components. You may notice I'm completing the work on a drive-on lift. There are a couple different reasons for that. The main reason was just to get it up out of my way while it's here and I have to store it inside. Now that the crappy season's here, I really need as many inside storage spots as I can get. That's just some further inspiration to get this Dart project done. I was gonna pull the block drain, but that turns out to be impossible, so giant mess it is, I guess. Using a screwdriver to pop the lower hose loose, look at this horrible muck coming out of there. Now, I don't do a whole lot of Slant 6 stuff on the channel, turbo slant projects notwithstanding, but I actually did do a Slant 6 drivetrain removal guide years ago. That was on a terribly rusty Scamp I cut to pieces on the channel. It's pretty straightforward. If you've ever done this with a V8, well, it's the same thing, but less. Because I have a lift and a transmission jack, I've decided to pull the transmission first. To do that, I'm gonna have to pull this guard. The starter needs to come out of the way to accomplish that. Then I'll remove the flex plate to torque converter bolts in here. There are 4 of those. Up next, I'll have to drop this cross member out. I've already loosened the hardware to do that. And finally, we'll unbolt the bell housing. Then this thing will pop right down on our transmission jack, and then I can move on to removing the engine. Obviously, that description was slightly simplified because there are a bunch of dumb little things I have to do as well. Park cable, shift cable, neutral safety wire, speedometer cable, transmission cooling lines. I think that's it. Oh yeah, drive shaft. That's kind of going to be a problem. This thing is actually pretty trick. It's the ball and trunnion delete. This is basically a truck-style slip yoke drive shaft with a flange that bolts right on where the original ball and trunnion did. In case you're not familiar with the term ball and trunnion, this is that. If you're familiar with CV axles, well, it's very similar, although not exactly the same. These were used across the board by Chrysler for decades in car applications. The last year for these, in A bodies and B bodies at least, would be 1964 behind an automatic and 1965 behind a 4-speed. Don't ask me who built this one or for part numbers for the requisite pieces. I have no idea. Anyway, back to removing stuff. I'm going to pull this park cable out. To do that, I need to pull this plug, which will result in fluid going everywhere. It's kind of hard to do with one hand through a camera with everything in the way, but anyway. There you go. Yep, that's some fresh fluid I just dumped in there. There goes like 12 bucks. Now, this pin locks the park cable in place. I've already loosened the nut. I'm going to tap this with a hammer, moving this stud thing that way, which should allow the cable body to slide out. With this plug out, I need to reach in there and pop a clip, and then the whole cable will come off. You should never need to pull this stud or nut completely. You just need it loose enough to slide past the cable body. And I need more hands. There you go. Oh, what a beautiful day. Moving right along, I've got the guard off of the torque converter here. That did require removing the block brace that goes from the side of the Slant 6 block to the bell housing. I've also got this bracket for the transmission lines, which I'm trying to take off right now, loose. I got the flex plate bolts out. Notice there's a paint mark here. I didn't do that this time. I might have done it last time when I took this transmission out. Spray paint your converter and the ear of your flex plate because these patterns are not square and it's possible to mix these positions up and then you can't get all the bolts in. Draining a transmission pan without a drain plug on it is always the worst. Here's a look inside the pan. Good bit of wear material, which is not ideal for a basically new transmission, but anyway. Transmission is down. It's a good thing these 904s for Slant 6s are not heavy at all. I did pull the converter out before I lifted that solo and set it on the ground. I usually try not to do dumb stuff like that, but I'm by myself today, so it is what it is. Going up and down with this lift is a giant pain in the butt because the locks don't work right. So I'm trying to get everything underneath knocked out real quick before I go down. Hopefully I'll just be able to pull the radiator, pull the fan, and then yank this thing out of there. As I've shown on this channel many times, I usually do the drivetrain removal and install complete. I'm not entirely sure why I dropped the transmission off first. Maybe because Alan said it was a good idea. Also because I'm definitely going to need to reseal that, so I might as well make this job a little bit easier. Moving right along here now, I've got the radiator out. Of course, that's held in with 4 7/16 hex bolts. The cooling lines and the lower hose were already off, so that was good. Top hose was super easy. We'll probably end up reusing these coolant hoses. Pull the fan out with the radiator out of the way, which you can do without pulling the fan. It's 4 1/2-inch hex bolts. Now the belt on the alternator is loose. I do need to loosen the power steering pump. That'll end up flopped over here and left in place. I did reseal and paint this some time ago. If it was leaking now, would I tell you that? Probably not. I took a bunch of reference photos so I know where all of this funky stuff goes. This car has this electric choke conversion kit, which is pretty cool. I'm unhooking everything from this BBD carb so I can pull it out of the way. Not that we necessarily have to do that. You don't use a lift plate to pick up a Slant 6. You put a chain on these bolt holes over here and it'll lift level-ish. How do you like the coolant overflow bottle in the Dart? I would have preferred to have seen a Red Bull can, but maybe that's just me. Before this engine goes in, it's going to get cleaned and painted, of course. The engine compartment is actually going to get a spritz of paint. And I did tell Vivian we had to do something about this air cleaner because it's kind of gross. The thing we do might just be put my nice one in there, but we'll figure that out later. For some reason, the rebuilders have taken to using metric hardware for this. That's a 10 mil. I should not need a 10 mil to work on this car. Yeah, so about that mess I was trying to prevent. It's mostly in the pan. It was making that terrible mess because I just got it up off of the mounts. It's remarkably easy to remove a Slant 6 when there's no transmission on the back. I think it was 20 minutes from getting the car down to right now. 35 minutes, but whatever. This poor cherry picker has been ridden hard, put away wet, and left outside to rust, dangling an engine for 6 months one winter. Anyway, hopefully it'll lift high enough to get this thing free up on the 4-post lift. That could be a problem. Now this is a note for future Jamie, everyone else can ignore it, you know, unless you have to do this yourself. The transmission cooling lines are pretty much like wedged in here, slightly over the dipstick tube. If it goes back in the way that it came out, these need to be like wedged up in there first. There are no clips holding them to the block, but they have to be in this gap, which is just terrible. For some reason, all of the transmission stuff is zip tied together, so I can't pull them out now either. That lump on the firewall is really in the way. Might have slightly scratched it. Remember that thing I said about hopefully the picker goes high enough or whatever? Yeah, it didn't, but I solved the problem in a janky way. So now we've got this greasy pile of 225 Slant 6 hanging here, and I'm gonna do the best I can to strip all of the necessary bits off of it relatively quickly. Here's your weekly reminder to go out in the garage and check the valve cover bolts on your Mopar. These are loose. Yet another reason why it leaks everything from everywhere. The flex plate, which I apparently cleaned and painted at some point, is held on with 6 3/4 hex bolts. Loctite. Nice. I don't always use that. Like bolting the converter to the flex plate, you can only bolt the flex plate to the crank in one direction. However, you don't really need to worry about marking it because, well, everything's out in the open when you're bolting this on, and it's easy. Why is this so stuck? Thanks to my Turbo Slant 6 project, which is currently very dead in case you were curious, I've gotten really good at pulling these manifolds. Small note, a bunch of the lower row of fasteners were totally loose here. I wouldn't worry about that too much. Think I need to come up with an EGR block-off plate for this one too, because that's just embarrassing. If you've never done Slant 6 stuff, these manifolds come off in a pair. The two are bolted together right here. There's a gasket between them because exhaust comes up to heat the bottom of the carburetor. Hopefully that gasket is intact and I can just leave all this together. This thing did have a nice Remflex manifold gasket. That gasket, of course, is for the intake and exhaust together. These manifolds are cast iron, or to put that another way, these manifolds are not light. But again, it's so much easier to do this out of a car. Despite the loose fasteners, it looks like this gasket sealed pretty well. Remflex is really the best. Look at this adorable little dipstick tube. What do you think my chances are for getting that out in one piece? I don't actually know if this is the original bottom end from this car. I think it might be. Obviously, the cylinder head is a later piece. You can tell that right away by the blue paint, of course, but you'll notice this thing does not have spark plug tubes. This has the later style peanut plugs that use a 5/8 socket. Here's the cylinder head I pulled off of the original Slant 6 from Dylan's Dart Sport to illustrate what that looks like. You can see the big holes here for the tube, and then the spark plug goes all the way down there. You know, so basically it's a 426 Hemi. I think this changed for 1975. I could be wrong. I decided to pull the spark plugs and have a look, and wow, this thing was running rich. The only plugs here that look remotely decent are number 5, which is kind of wet for some reason, and number 4, and it's super rich too. It's just I can see a little bit of brown color there. Probably don't need to hit this one with a hammer. Nope. Greasy. Oh, Alexa, add giant sonic cleaner to my shopping list. Here we have the original style adjustable Slant 6 rocker arms. The later engines, like the one we're building for this car, came with hydraulic lifters and non-adjustable arms. For obvious reasons, we're going to use these. Here are the original push rods out of the Greasy 225. We will plan to retain these for the new engine after a cleaning, of course. Hopefully in an ultrasonic cleaner I need to buy. There could be an issue here. First off, bending push rods is really common in these Slant 6s, so we'll check all of them for that. Second, remember, we shaved the block, and we're probably going to shave the head another similar amount. We may have an issue with pushrod length after all of that material removal. I am encouraged looking at the current position of these stock adjusters. They may be buried that deep because this is a reground cam, so the base circle is smaller than stock. I think it's going to be fine. Let's say for now it's going to be fine. We'll probably reuse this fuel pump. It obviously needs a cleaning. Add alternator/coil bracket to the list of not so tight things on this car. Oh, this bracket does bolt to the block and the head, and again, this relationship will be changing on our new build. We might have to hog out this hole a little bit. We also might need a spacer in there now that I think about it. We'll blow up that bridge when we get to it. This electronic distributor has the early style hold down on it. The later block uses a different setup. It has basically a clamp like a small block. So we'll have to figure that out. We'll need some kind of adapter piece, which I might actually have somewhere now that I think about it. I know I have the stock hold down. If I can't find what I need here, I'll give Matt with Mattman's Mopars a holler. He's got an eBay store where he sells all kinds of fancy Slant 6 stuff. He pretty much has the goods for all these sorts of builds. We're getting down there now. I really don't need much else off of this aside from, well, maybe the timing cover and the oil pan, although it's super smashed. Maybe I have a better one around here. I'm probably not going to do a full teardown diagnostic thing on this engine. We'll get a look at the bores when the head comes off, but there really wasn't much wrong with it, so I don't see the point in doing that. Anti-seize? Ugh, the herpes of automotive chemicals. Before pulling the head, I really wanted to get that drain plug out. Nope. Mess it is, I guess. Slant 6 heads, of course, are heavy because they're gigantic. Well, that's weird. No mess. Forgot to undo the bypass hose. I meant to pull the water pump first, but I did not do that. Yeah, I think we'll replace that horrible squishy hose. Take 2. Oh, yeah. Yo, it's peeing on my leg, but there's not too much mess. Oh. All right, well, I expected worse. It's a Philpro head gasket. No surprise there. Got a little bit of coolant down in the lifter area, which is really gross. It's kind of interesting on these engines, they don't have a side cover like many period 6 cylinders did. So to get the lifters out, you actually do have to pull the head off. Printo seal. I was gonna say I don't see any issues with the head gasket, but actually, a couple questionable spots here. A little crispy spot there. Nothing obviously broken though. You know, I thought this bottom end was rebuilt. Maybe just the head and the cam were changed. This is looking pretty crusty and original. Lots of carbon buildup. Lots of bore wear. Yeah, you know, either way, we're doing the right thing. Here's a look at the business end of the Slant 6 cylinder head. Look how deep this chamber is. Look at all this meat right here, ripe for the grinding. There is a reason why cutting these heads is pretty much SOP when you're trying to do performance Slant 6 stuff. I was worried for a second there. I saw something that looked like a crack, but it was just horrible, horrible carbon buildup. Something you pretty much always want to check or maybe just go ahead and replace when you're messing with old heads like this. Valve seals. Now these are actually still squishy rubber. Again, they've only been in here for a couple decades, so we could ignore them. We're not going to, but we could. Some builders get carried away porting these heads as much as possible. I'm not planning to do any of that stuff. We're going to bump the compression, and we're going to stick with our performance camshaft and the 2-barrel manifold, and that'll really be enough for our purposes here. If you're familiar with the Slant 6 engine family, then you know that this is not a cross-flow head. It's a counter-flow head, or whatever they call that. The intake and the exhaust are on the same side, which does not promote horsepower production or high RPM performance. There are some other basic architectural issues here, like the fact that the Tall Deck 225 is an under-square engine. That is, an engine with a longer stroke than it has a bore. This too hamstrings the performance potential. What we're trying to do is eke out what we can, but we're not going crazy trying to make a big horsepower number. The Slant 6 just won't do that. That, of course, is why we can get away with the late light-duty cast crankshaft from the 80s engine. We have less rotational mass, so this thing will be a happier revving engine, and we're never going to make enough power to break it. Every single decision you make in engine building is a compromise. The compromise I'm making here is trading off a little bit of top-end power potential, which, again, we probably wouldn't be using anyway, in the interest of time. So my next move is just to drop this greasy head off at the machine shop. We'll let them clean this thing, break it down, check all of the seats, and then take a serious cut off the deck. I've yet to figure out what that's going to be. I'm thinking something like 40 or 50 thou. I do still need to pull out the cam and lifters and get a measurement on this thing. At least a lift number will give us half an idea what we're dealing with, and that's pretty easy to do. I'm totally out of time to do that tonight, so we'll get back to this tomorrow. In the meantime, I can sleep soundly knowing this car probably won't be pissing various fluids on my charger anymore. Menace. It's the next day and things look similar. Now I need to get the cam out, which means pulling the balancer and the timing cover. I probably should pull the oil pan first, but again, I don't really need to get into the bottom end, and it can sit kind of sort of okay on that pan and these couple of wood blocks, so I think I'll be leaving that for now. Do need to maneuver things so I can get to these bolts though. Made some more coolant mess, getting the water pump off. Not that it's really in the way, but I might as well. Hey, some of that even went in the bucket. In addition to pulling the balancer and timing cover, I also needed to get the lifters out, so I'm doing that now. I am wiping these things off, hand labeling them, and then setting them in order carefully. We'll make sure to not disturb this box. It's not going to fit all of them in a straight line. Whatever. Just like earlier 273s, the Slant 6 in this time used a dumbbell style lifter. Look at all the oil around that. That's pretty impressive given that there are no oil feed holes to these lifters. All of the oil captured around these is drip oil coming back down from the top end. Don't worry about the antifreeze in there, that's fine. I've never quite understood the purpose of the dumbbell lifter in the V8 application, but here it makes perfect sense. You have that area that captures oil, and then it holds it there to keep the lifter lubricated. You're always going to see some varnish buildup on lifters when you pull them out. Luckily, the buildup isn't too bad on this engine, and they are coming right out of the holes. Well, except one put up a bit of a fight. This is always my least favorite part. I don't know why, it's not even hard. I beat the timing cover with a sledgehammer from many angles, and it came loose. Yeah, you know, I've seen better. Remind me to put this back in later. Seal's not all that squishy. Pulled the cam gear and was pretty much ready to pull the cam out, but I remembered the oil pump is actually driven by the camshaft on these engines. It might sneak by it, but I'm just gonna take this thing off too. I don't know why I hadn't done that yet, really. So much red silicone. On Mopar V8 applications, you can kind of get in and help the cam out. So you don't really need to use a big long bolt or a holder or anything like that. On this, kind of a different story. Carefully. Obviously, we don't have to worry about these cam bearings too much, but we need this cam to survive the experience. Nice. Sometimes cam manufacturers will put useful numbers on there. We've got a 254. I don't know if that's the advertised duration or what. Of course, this is a solid lifter setup, so you can see here, there's lifter contact in this area, but on the base circle, the coating that's put on the camshaft after it's ground is actually still intact. Not seeing anything to worry about here, which is good. Again, we kind of need to reuse this. There might be other engines like this in the world, I don't know, but Slant 6s are peculiar in that this gear in the middle runs the distributor, but also the oil pump. The pump gear comes in this way, and then the distributor gear comes in this way. Now, depending on the cam, the lobe profile will either match between the exhaust and the intake, or the exhaust may be a little more aggressive. The reason for that, as I understand anyway, is because the exhaust valves are always smaller than the intake valves. The little bit extra flow on the exhaust side will help move air out compared to the larger intake. Anyway, for that reason, I always measure an exhaust lobe, and the lobe order on this cam is exhaust, intake, exhaust, intake, exhaust, intake, intake, exhaust, intake, exhaust, intake, exhaust. We'll just go for this front one. I'll put the crappy digital caliper thingy here on the base circle. We'll zero that and then carefully twist it up to the high point on the lobe. I've got 0.28. That's not a precise number, but it's going to be close. 0.280 would be our lobe lift number. When we multiply that by the rocker ratio, which on the Slant, of course, is 1.5, we get 0.420 lift. For a tiny little engine, that's something. I don't exactly have Slant 6 factory cam specs memorized, but I do happen to have the cam that came out of the 80s engine. You could tell this one was for a hydraulic lifter engine because of this full-time oiling groove at the number 5 cam bearing journal. I've discussed the fact that a reground camshaft like this one achieves a higher lift number by having the base circle of a given lobe machined away. Essentially, because this is smaller, the lifter starts out closer to the center of the cam, and then when it rides up on the lobe, the difference between those 2 points is greater. For science, I compared the diameter of this base circle to the factory hydraulic cam base circle, and I found a difference of 0.08 inches. There was also a lobe height difference on this cam though, so the difference between the two turned out to be 0.240 inches, which would give us a lift of 0.360, or to put that another way, nothing. Now there is another important difference between these cams. This one is a solid lifter, this one is a hydraulic lifter. So you do have to subtract your lash from this big number. On the intake side, it's probably gonna be 10 thousandths, so something like 410 lift. Exhaust is typically, 15, maybe 20 thousandths? Wow, I remembered right. At least according to this post on slant6.org, the lash specs are 10 thou intake, 20 thou exhaust. Even with the lash taken into account, you're still getting a whole lot more lift from this cam than from this one. Of course, I understand lift is just one simple measurement describing a camshaft. There are other more important factors like duration at 50 thousandths and the lobe separation angle. This is the one I can measure easily, so it's what we're looking at here. If I were smart, I'd finish cleaning this cam right now and slam it into this engine, but I'm not smart and I'm also out of time. So now we've got a 63 Dart GT fully in pieces and the remains of a Greasy 225 short block sitting here right in the way of everything. I will probably tear it down at some point for science, and if I find anything interesting, obviously I'll show you that. For now, I'm just going to drag this greasy lump of cast iron off to the machine shop. They'll get this thing finished and we'll probably see it in a couple weeks. Anyway, tune in next time when we make an even bigger mess and do more cool Slant 6 stuff. Until then, as ever, thanks for watching. And remember, 6 in a row, please don't tow stuff with a Slant 6. That's a bad idea.